So taking a look at wrist structure and joints and what needs to happen in order to get full wrist range of motion, particularly in the case of RA, where you are getting an inflammation in the joints themselves already, and there's an increase in fluid in the joints. So I'm going to add on a little bit of ligaments here, just so you can get a visual, and then I'm actually going to take them off and we'll talk about what needs to happen. We'll just spin this way to get full range of motion. So as you can tell, there is a lot going on in the wrist joint itself, okay? There's a lot of little ligament attachments to different bones so that there is stability while there's also a lot of mobility. So you need it to be able to move, obviously, to go through strengthening exercises like push-ups, things like that. So if we take these back off, let's see. Yeah, let's just take them off. So we'll just remove all of the ligaments here for a second. So if you can tell, this surface in here is a little bit more concave, so it's a little bit hollowed. And then the actual wrist bones are a little bit more rounded, right? So they sit really nicely in here. In order for you to get actual full range of motion, let me spin this guy around a little so we can see it from the side. Okay. So if you are trying to get full wrist flexion, let me get a little pen action here going. Flexion meaning, we'll just use orange. Okay. So if we're trying to get your wrist to go this direction, right? Like you're standing, your palm is forward, and we want it to come forward. If you are looking at this joint in here, let's just move it a little bit. You can see up in here that since it is round on concave, when it comes forward, there actually needs to, and if this doesn't make sense, don't worry about it, there needs to be a bit of a glide coming this way. Otherwise, you're going to roll forward and you're going to end up all of this ball kind of just coming towards the edge here. If you got a lot of increased swelling already in your joint, and you've got some swelling in the tissues even around your joint, you end up getting really limited in your ability to go down. Okay, and that one you were actually limited to about 45 degrees on the first session before I worked on you. So what I was doing is, we'll clear this out, I was actually pulling, I don't really want this pen. I was actually pulling down just a little bit. So if we're looking at your joint, I was kind of gapping in this direction, pulling down. And I was giving you motion this direction as well as this direction. Because when you are thinking rolling and you want to be able to bend that wrist forward, bend that wrist backwards, if this ball, we'll call it a ball since it's the rounded side, part doesn't actually glide one way or the other, you end up getting really limited. So just by doing some back and forth motion there, and really encouraging that glide into your wrist flexion extension, we actually gained about 30 to 40 degrees with you day one, which is pretty nifty. So if we come into this, let's see, let's add on some muscles here. And we'll bring it to where it's just looking at your hand. Sorry, I got a little crazy on my controls here. So if you can picture your wrist not moving very well, moving forward into that flexion pattern, these muscles back here will get a little bit tight in a sense of they just haven't been able to move through their range of motion in a little bit. So what I was also doing with you is I was kind of pinning, so in that little gap on the back of your hand that we talked about, it's in this area, it's kind of right over your scaphoid bone. I was kind of pinning there and stretching your wrist down, which you were getting a little bit of stretch in these muscles here because they're just not typically able to be stretched because your joints are limiting it. So that is where you're going to end up working with the tennis ball. on these muscles up here. And then on the flip side, when you're not quite as limited into extension going back, but these guys also get a little bit shortened when you just don't have full extension, like you're not able to get into that push-up position type of a deal. So I would use the tennis ball and work on both sides and just see how you do. And just for sake of showing you this is the front side of your palm. I know it looks a little weird when there's no skin on there. So let's actually then take a look down at the foot area. So most of your discomfort is in these joints here. And just to put the skin on, not necessarily these little guys out here. You get a lot of deeper, particularly on the bottom underneath your third one. So we'll keep this angle, okay? And we'll actually put the pin on so you can tell like your most amount of discomfort was under this guy. So if we keep that there and we just take your skin off and then gives you a better look at the joint we're talking about, this was that deeper joint that we were talking about during your evaluation. So I'm going to get rid of the pin now. And if we take a look in here, we have the same kind of concept that this is rounded, this is concave, right? So if we are trying to encourage motion at this joint, when I was pulling, we'll go back to our handy dandy pin, when I was pulling this way, kind of like when somebody tries to pop your toes, you know, and they yank on it, it gaps this joint right here. And when it's gapping that joint, and when I'm moving then up and down, it's allowing that motion to happen a little bit easier. You don't really care for toe extension. So basically, let's zoom out a touch and come back here. Toe extension meaning lifting. Like if you've got that leg behind you and you're doing that lunge, that's really painful for you. It doesn't care for that. So when I was working on the toes, that one wasn't quite as big of a before and after change, but I think it can get to be over time. So when you're doing your self-mobilizations, working on pulling and encouraging a little bit of a glide either direction. So if you're going to want your toes to be able to come up, you need, and I'll just draw this on here. So if you want this toe to be able to extend up, when you are pulling on this joint right here, you want to kind of distract it out this direction, and then you want to lift, okay? Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense as far as directions go. Don't worry too much about it. But let's just look at actions of the toe here. So if you can think about the fact that this tendon really, like since you're not getting a ton of motion in these joints sometimes, these guys could get a little bit, we'll call it shortened again. So it may feel nice to just give yourself a little bit of a foot massage there. And then if we're bringing, well, if we can bring this whole thing down, up here on your shin actually, you can use that tennis ball and get those loosened up a little bit also. And on the bottom of the foot, you can stick the tennis ball under here and just roll it, because if we're going back to thinking on how you're limited moving up, it will limit by some of these guys here. They actually help pull your toes down. So yeah, using tennis ball. Just wanted to give you a better overview of what your joint capsules actually entail. So inside here, we'll take off your muscles and just get you a little different look. And we may be able to actually cut some of this bone. Yeah, so this is a nice smooth surface here. And if we were to even just get rid of this whole area and then look underneath it, oh, sorry. You'll be able to see this is kind of nice and round. So this bone itself, when I haven't cut it away, just needs to be able to slide over that. And instead of it being able to slide, this whole area gets really inflamed. Same when you're looking at your big toe. It's that same round surface, and you just need to be able to move it up and down. So a lot of pulling this guy away to think you're increasing this space in here. And then it's whether you are moving up or down with that bone. So let's clear it off here, give you a little bit of a different view. Sorry, takes a sec on my computer to get these to not look crazy. So if we look at you from the side, if we want this toe to be able to come up and handle like a lunge position, that means that we need to get in here. So let me zoom gently without getting crazy. Here we go. So when you're doing your joint mobs, you want to think about pulling slightly. Now this is the joint that is really crunchy. So really, really slight. If you pull too far, it does that weird funky crunch of it getting kind of back into place. But if you really gently pull and then you're really gently kind of lifting at this joint, it should help encourage that motion of the toe being able to come here. And if that makes no sense, don't worry about it. I'm happy to work on it, but if you want to work on it yourself, that's how I would do it. I would do a little distraction and then just work on kind of up and down at those joints. And then all those little baby foot muscles that were in there, all these guys, when you're working on your toe scrunches, when you're working on those heel lifts, pushing through the tip of your toes, it is working on strengthening all of these little muscles underneath here, okay? So hopefully that gives you a pretty good overview and makes sense.